everybody. Welcome to our CLE. I am Joanne Litt, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Immigration Section, along with Maggie Stewart, who is also on your screen. And before we get started, there's just a couple of housekeeping things we wanted to let everyone know about. And on October 28th, we're co-sponsoring a CLE with the Labor and Employment Section about the Domestic Workers Bill of Rights. So those are our upcoming events. And now Maggie will introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We only have an hour, so we're going to dive right in. Today's speaker is Barry Schreiber, and he's going to be speaking on the ramifications of translation in immigration matters. Barry is a partner in the Israel-based law firm and also is the marketing and networking director for Allied Interpreting and Translating Services. He has been practicing law for over 50 years, starting in Florida in 1971, and was called also to the Bar of Israel in 1997. He was elected Miami-Dade County, Florida Commissioner, 1976 to 1990. He's also got quite a rich history, including owning a farmers insurance agency, working as a judge pro tem for the Municipal Court of Santa Fe in New Mexico, working as a certified managerial mediator, arbitrator, negotiator, investment banker, member of SAG-AFTRA, and he's also the grandfather to 5 children and says he's proud to be 78 years old. So we're really happy to have Barry here today, and we welcome him to the Immigration Section at Beverly Hills Bar Association. We're looking forward to your presentation. Just as a note to everyone, you will be receiving your MCLE certificates and a copy of the PowerPoint by email about 24 hours after the presentation is finished today. If you have questions, you can put them up in the chat or into the Q&A, but we are going to be doing questions at the end of the presentation. Okay, so feel free to write them there, and we'll hold them and ask them all when we get to the end of the presentation around 1:20. Thanks very much, and I'm going to hand it over to Barry.
Thank you very much, Maggie and Joanne. Yes, 78, and I still have many more things that I want to do before the final curtain. So trust me, I'm not going to stop. Anyhow, I am very, very pleased to welcome you all to the CLE presentation of the ramifications of interpreting and translating in the practice of law, and certainly in the immigration field. This information is really important. I'm going to give you hopefully a complete understanding of the nuts and bolts of interpreting and translating, but at the same time, I'm going to give a greater understanding of the world of interpreting and translating as it relates to the way we interrelate with human beings, and the way we have to understand that languages and culture are completely connected, and we really need to understand that. So let me get started and tell you just briefly that certainly with my background of practicing law for over 50 years, both in Florida and Israel and even some other places that I've been involved in, and having been involved with Allied Interpreting Services, I do have a complete understanding of the relationship between the practice of law and the interpreting and translating world. And we'll get into that, but I do feel that I am fairly competent to discuss this. So let me start off by saying, pardon my glasses, but I've had some eye surgery in the last couple months, and I do have to kind of put some reading glasses on every so often. So if you remember Larry the Cable Guy and the way that they talk about needing certain things, I kind of stole this from them. So if you do not speak all languages, you may need an interpreter. If you do not write, read, or understand all languages, you may need a translator. If you want to expand your practice, your client market, you will definitely need an interpreter or translator. This presentation, my friends, are going to be divided into three sections. One is language and culture. The second is nuts and bolts. And three, the legal ramifications. So if we go to the next slide, which should say objective, the objective is to convey to attorneys, that's us, the awareness of an aspect of the practice of law that we may have overlooked or taken for granted. And I put myself in that category because when I started to practice immigration law in the early 1980s, I didn't know anything about interpreters, translators, and that whole world. So if I needed a translator, interpreter, I got one. It was a person. That's it. That's all I knew. It was a person that was going to come to the office to do the translation, the interpreting, and someone to do the translation. That is as much as I knew. And it was like just understanding them in a vacuum with no connection to the real world, who they really are, and how they really helped us. Next slide, please. It should say understanding better. Okay, so when we complete this presentation, you will have a basic appreciation of the world of translating and interpreting as it pertains to the practice of law, as it pertains to understanding better and empathy for those who speak foreign languages. And foreign languages is any language that is not your language. As far as a better understanding of languages and culture, you'll be a better lawyer and have better human interaction. And as far as culture, you will understand that culture is a way of life expressed in such language. So a language indicates culture, and a culture has dictated many of the expressions and language. Next slide, please, should say number of languages. Okay, look at this. English is the biggest language. 1.2 billion people speak it. Chinese, Hindi, Spanish, French, Arabic, Russian, Bengali, Portuguese, and Indonesian. These are the major languages. There are roughly 6,500 spoken languages in the world today. Let's eliminate 2,000 of those languages because they have fewer than 1,000 speakers. So we're left with 4,500. That's a lot of languages, And trust me, I've had requests for languages that I have never heard of, but they're there. By the way, there's an interesting book or website, ethnologue.com. If you check that out, you'll be able to see all around the world what languages are spoken where. And it's a very, very interesting presentation, because if you're interested in this area, you will see how many languages are spoken, where they're spoken, and it'll give you a great background of culture. So that's ethnologue.com. Okay. The next slide, please. Let's see what that says on your end. Okay, let's hold that, let it sit there. So I'm going to ask you this question. How many languages do you speak? Now, I speak English, Hebrew, and I used to speak Spanish fairly well. My native tongue is English. If we speak one language and one language only, we have nothing to compare ourselves with. We can't compare ourselves with someone who speaks Hebrew or someone Spanish or Portuguese or French. And we won't understand that language is born of culture. And then I've asked myself this question: am I the same person when I speak Hebrew or Spanish as I am when I speak English? And lo and behold, I came to the conclusion that I'm not, because I transform myself from the person with an understanding of English and English culture to a person who speaks Hebrew and relates to the other people around me that speak Hebrew. And the same with Spanish and the same with other language. So I am not the same person. I join the culture and the people who are speaking the other language. Cultures vary, different ways of seeing the world. Some words don't even exist in other languages, or they mean something else. The sayings and expressions in other languages do not have the sayings and expressions that we have in the English language. How did all this get started? Why do we have so many languages? Well, if we want to take some of the stories of the Bible, it could have started way back when, after the flood and the world settled down, the people of a certain area began to build a tower trying to reach God. So they started to build the tower. God looked down and said, wow, I don't like that. And God just crushed the tower and dispersed the 70 people to all corners of the world. And so at that point, there were 70 different languages and no one understood each other. So they couldn't communicate. Okay, maybe that's the way it got started. Maybe it didn't. But on the other hand, we certainly have to look back in history to determine how did all this begin. Next slide, please, if you can find the slide that says translations versus interpretations. I think it would be back. Okay, there you go. All right. In the use of the word translations and interpretations, or translators or interpreters, they are different. Translators translate the written word. So in the practice of law, it's a transactional. Interpreters deal with the spoken word. So for all intents and purposes, that's in the litigation field. Now, when we speak without thinking in terms of the legal ramifications, somebody can say something to you and you can say, I don't understand that. Can you translate it for me? Okay, wrong use of the word, but that's how we got to use it. So we mix up the words interpreting and translating in our everyday speech, but in the world of interpreting in the legal field, translation is written and interpreting is spoken. Next slide, please, which is going to have translators and interpreters skill sets. Do you have that? Go back. It should go back a little bit. I think you had that slide. There you go. Perfect. Okay. So in the field of interpreters, what skill sets should interpreters have? Well, they have to be precise in converting from the language being spoken, let's say Russian, into the language that you need to understand, English. So have to understand the knowledge in colloquialism, dialects. But I've been asked, do interpreters need to interpret gestures? No, they need to interpret immediately. Someone says something in Russian, and you need to the interpreter interprets it immediately. So the interpreter does not concern themselves with the tone of voice or with gestures of the person who is speaking that foreign language. This is important, and we'll talk about that later. Now, translators have to pay attention to detail, knowledge of the use of the words in the subject language, precise translation to the language being translated, understanding the nuances of both languages, the lingo and expertise in the field of the underlying issue, engineering, medical, etc. Which means if a translator is going to translate a document having to do with real technical stuff or medical stuff, they also need to understand the medical terminology to be able to translate it perfectly. The next slide, you should have, it should say interpreters proficiency level. Perfect. Okay. In the world of interpreters and translators, there's an administrative certified interpreters, which is only good for interpreters who will be involved in workers' compensation. Then we have the court certified interpreters, and they interpret and working for the state court and in civil cases, and they have a wider range of flexibility in interpreting. And then you have the federally certified, which means that those interpreters and translators can work in the federal system. Now, it does not mean that any of these interpreters or translators have a better understanding or a better knack of translating or interpreting. It just means that that's the area that they wanted to focus on. Okay, so with that understanding, let's go to the next slide that you may have, but I think I have one that you don't. Okay, hold it there. Now, just as an aside, there's something called a medical interpreter proficiency. Now, let's say a doctor is going to examine a patient, and the doctor speaks English and the patient speaks Portuguese, Russian, or whatever. There are interpreters out there that will be required to be in the office when the examination is taking place, making sure that the doctor and the patient are able to communicate each other, making sure that the doctor's diagnosis, etc., is the best that it can be. These are not required when depositions or other, let's say, depositions are taken of doctors. Again, any interpreter in that situation will work, but when there's an examination, you need to have a medical interpreter proficiency level, and those are, again, available upon request. Now, in this slide that you see, the legal documents needed to be translated. Well, basically, I'd pretty much say any document that is in a foreign language that needs to be submitted to an administrative government agency or the courts must be done by a certified or registered translator. We'll talk about certification shortly. But just as an example, what documents, financial documents, official reports, transcripts, filed patents from other countries, proceedings and legal rulings from other countries, witnesses' statements, legal translations for immigration documents, litigation papers, articles of incorporation, wills, trusts, and prenups and postnups, divorces. And then you'll see the word Google Translate. So let me just give you a little insight. Google, and there may be some others, that if you take the foreign language, let's say for the moment, Spanish, and you put it into Google, I can tell you that you will get a decent, understandable translation. And you will know what it means. So if that's as much as you need, yes, you can use Google or other internet type translations. However, that translation is not perfect, not by any means. And so when you must submit this to the court, it then needs to be done by a certified translator, because every word counts and every period and every comma counts, because we know as lawyers, we can't just put some words together in English and think that they will work. We draft and we redraft. So the same thing is very true in translating. Google works for a good understanding, but is not a certified document. All right, now, next slide should say when and why to utilize interpreters. Okay, well, in the attorney-client meetings, the first meeting, and you don't understand the language, you're going to need an interpreter. In depositions, in testimonials, in trials, you're going to need interpreters. And then if you want to expand your firm's reach globally, and especially in the immigration field, and as well in the international law field, if you want to expand, you want to be able to say in whatever marketing documents you have, and even in your little conversations that you may have, our firm speaks every language, any language. Why? Because whoever comes to your office, you can supply an interpreter for that language, and you can translate any documents from that language. Trust me, that will increase your marketing range and increase your business on a global basis when you let people know you can speak any language. The whole purpose of translation and interpreting in the legal field is the legal interpretation, similar to other kinds of interpretation, is the precise placement of the source language, Russian, Ukrainian, Spanish, with the objective language into English. That's critical. That's the bottom line. Legal translations and interpreters ensure that process, including technical terms, are precisely interpreted or translated. Next slide, please, should say interpreters and translators. Okay, I think we have it. All right, now let's talk about interpreters and translators on how they charge. Interpreters typically charge clients for a half a day, a whole day, or by the hour. Additionally, the charges may include the complexity of the language. So let's say Spanish may not be that difficult, but Hindu is difficult. Arabic is extremely difficult, and you can't get many of them. I'll touch upon that in a moment. Venue. Now, venue means where the deposition is going to take place and where the interpreter is coming from. Now, when you have Zoom, and how long that Zoom will be here, who knows? And it's been a while, and most interpreters do not go personal anymore. They do the Zoom. But if the interpreter is in LA and the deposition is going to take place in San Diego, well, you have to pay for travel time and mileage, etc. Also, when scheduled, meaning you can't call and get an interpreter for what your need is the day before you need it, because they just may not be available. But if it's really, really important and they have to change their schedule, they're going to charge for it. The best thing to do is to call as soon as you know that you're going to set a deposition in advance. That's when you should schedule. So again, interpreters charge a half a day, a whole day, or by the hour. Now, translators charge differently, naturally. Typically, they charge by the word or the page. Some translators charge by the page, some by the word. And as well as the cost is also dependent on the language, the complexity of the language, how quickly the translation is needed, and the level of technicality. So if you have a one-page document that needs to be translated and you have a day or two or three to do it, that's fine. But if you have a 50-page document in a difficult language and you want it the next day Well, most likely it's going to be exceptionally difficult to get that done. But if it can be done and the translator has to stay up all day and all night to get it done, you're going to have to pay for it. So once again, as a practicing lawyer, when you need interpreters, try to have them scheduled in advance. And when you need translations, don't wait for the last minute unless it's an emergency. And if it's an emergency, well, it can all be taken care of. Next slide, please. And it should say required certification. Okay, this is probably one of the more important slides that I want you to look at, because as of January 1, 2017, and I have not been able to determine whether this has been updated or not. It seems to be the case that this is updated. These languages, American Sign Language, Arabic, Eastern, Armenian, Western, Armenian, Cantonese, Farsi, Japanese, Khmer, Cambodian, Korean, Mandarin, Portugal, Punjabi, Russian, Spanish, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. These are certifiable languages. Now, what does that mean? That means if the language falls into any of these categories, the interpreter must be certified in that language, both as an interpreter and if it's a translation, as a translator. And the document then, or the interpreter, has a code that they have been certified, that they've kept their certification up to the couple years that it needs to be updated, just like lawyers on the CLE. Every 3 years, we need to show the bar that we have learned some stuff. And so these languages in court must be done and submitted by certified interpreters and translators. Take this slide and keep it, because when you need any of these languages, you'll be smart enough to say, we need a certified interpreter for this language. Now, that doesn't mean if that person who speaks Portuguese comes to your office just for the first meeting, then you don't need it certified. But if that deposition you're going to submit into the court for acceptance by the court, then it has to be done by a certified translator. Next slide, please. See if it's the one that I have. It should say in California. Okay, you can leave that. Just so you know, in California, we have only 7 Arab certified interpreters, and that's a major language that needs certified interpreters. We have 272,485 Arab speakers that reside in California. So do the math and see what percentage. And not all of those 7 Arabic certified interpreters live in the LA area. They live in San Francisco. They live elsewhere. So when you need a Arabic interpreter or translator, you need to have give us advance notice, because they are very, very rare. Now, translators and interpreters, how do they become certified? Well, compare it to the bar. We go to school, we take the bar, and we're now a member of the bar. But every 3 years, we have to do the CLEs. Now, interpreters and translators have a similar type of program. The American Translation Association has non-certified and certified translators. Some translators are certified for both languages, meaning, let's say, Russian to English, English to Russian. They're certified for both, or Russian to Spanish, Spanish to Russian. And some translators are certified just for one language, let's say Russian, but they can translate Russian to English, for example, from Russian into English, not certified in the English to Russian. The American Translators Association is among one of the most selective associations, with a pass rate of only 20%. So here's an example. Farsi is a certified language. I know many people who speak Farsi. One or two of them wanted to become certified. They thought they could just be easily done. They went to take the test and they failed it. There's a difference between being able to speak the language and become certified. So we sent them back and they're trying now to become certified. The rule of thumb, any document presented to a governmental judiciary body or governmental or judiciary body must be certified to be admissible. And if that language is certifiable, it must be done by a certified interpreter or translator. The certification renewal process means every 2 years, the interpreter must go through this process, submit all the information, and get their certification renewed. The next slide I think you have up there, and we're talking about ethics and globalization. English is the dominant language in business around the globe, and not all clients or people speak English, fluid English. In the United States and around the world, interpreters and translators are a necessity to practice law ethically and efficiently. The US population speaks about 350 languages. That's as of 2015. I haven't been able to get an updated amount, so I'll assume that there is going to be more. And the nation has over 60 million people who are bilingual. Good information to have and understanding, certainly in the immigration practice. Next slide, please. Next slide should say Interpreters and Translators Code of Ethics. Okay, just like lawyers have a code of ethics, so do interpreters and translators. Accuracy and completeness, confidentiality, and many interpreters, and we always give them the name of the lawyers, the name of the person who is being deposed, and the name of the clients in the case to make sure that there is no conflict of interest and they are totally impartial. Limitations of practice, they focus on their language and they are accountable for getting there on time and making sure everything works the way it should. They have professional development and respect for all. Rarely, if ever, do we have problems with interpreters in the field of ethics. That I can tell you. Next slide, please. See if it's there. Okay, in California, there seems to be a law that when in the field of real estate, if not even some of the other fields, when a contract is drawn up for a person whose language is English is not their mother tongue, you must translate it to their language. And by the way, on lawyers' retainer agreements, it's extremely important to make sure that the client, if English is not their mother tongue, completely understand the document that they're signing, and therefore we get a lot of requests to translate the retainer agreement from English to whatever language that is necessary, because you certainly don't want to have problems with a client saying, well, I didn't understand that. All right. Next slide, please. Should have dialects, cultural accounts, and okay. So you see these two people here. You see the heart. And so it's going to be explained by, in the Burmese language, which is a Sino-Tibetan language. The language that is spoken is Myanmar. In Burmese, the word marriage, pronounced Ain Hatung, I'm not sure I pronounced it correctly, can be understood in English as a direct translation as house of prison. Now that's pretty funny for those who speak English, because if we think of marriage as a house of prison, I'm not sure how far that's going to take us, but that is just to let you know that there are different translations of languages that are going to be totally different from one language to another. The next slide is, let's see what okay, we'll get to that in a moment. I'm not sure of the time frame. It's already 1:10, so I just want to let you know that with a longer presentation, I tried to explain, and I digress a bit, and I talk about just speaking from one person to another, how we misinterpret what people say and how it can lead to different problems, whether writing, saying the wrong words, not understanding people's demeanor, their way of speaking, their eyes, their contact. We cause ourselves all kinds of problems because we don't listen. And I guess I'll just cut to the bottom of that presentation, which is a wonderful presentation. We have 2 ears and we have 1 mouth, and we need to learn that we need to listen double the amount, if not more, of the time that we speak. 1 tongue, 2 ears. Listen more than we speak. Now, I have a number of slides that I'm going to just skip here because of the time, and it has to do with the area that I just mentioned to you. And let's see, we're going to get now to, I guess I could summarize that there is an art of communications between people. It's not something that you're born with. It's something that you have to learn. And I believe not only as practicing lawyers, but as human beings, we need to learn the art of communication in whichever language we are speaking. All right, let's go to cognates in linguistics. Linguistics cognates means having the same linguistic derivatives as another from the same original word or root. Example, English is, German ist. Latin est from Indo-European esti. Curioso means curious. Delicioso, these are Spanish. In Spanish, curioso, in English, curious. Delicioso, Spanish, in English, delicious. Glorioso, Spanish, in English, glorious. Okay, however, in the next slide, we have false cognates. False cognates are pairs of words that seem to be cognates because of similar sounds and meanings, but have different etymologies. For instance, Spanish, intoxicado. It does not mean intoxicated. It means poisoned. Decepción does not mean deception. It means disappointed. And when you understand that these words don't mean the same thing, you'll be aware of it. There was a case that I heard that in Spanish, they were yelling, the kid is intoxicado, intoxicado. So they thought he was drunk. So they gave him coffee, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that didn't work. He got sicker and even died until they found out that he was poisoned and they were giving the wrong remedies. All right, let's go into the next slide, which should say interpreter and translator mistakes. Now, we are now at a 1:14 time element, and I want to give time for questions or at least be able to finish the presentation. Interpreters and translators mistakes. And this is important because mistakes are made. Example, in a court case for Haitian Creole man involved in a lawsuit due to a car accident, the Creole interpreter relayed the message into English, and it sounded a little something like this. The crash is not my fault, you see. There were dogs in my nose. That's why I hit the car in front of me. The interpreter quickly realized his mistake. He defended, the defendant had used a saying, chin up, where, I'm not going to try to read that. In Haitian, it meant raining cats and dogs, but when directly interpreted in English, it came out as dogs in my nose. In another case, a man shouted Spanish from the back of the courtroom, "I didn't rape anybody." His interpreter told him he was accused of a violación, which in Spanish does not mean violation, but rape. The interpreter should have used the word infracción. A police detective asked, "Did you try and kill her?" The defendant asked why he would do that. The detective responded, "You grabbed her by the neck." According to the prosecution transcription and translation, the defendant replied, "YOLO, he say, I did that." According to the defense transcription and translation, the defendant replied, "No lo, he say, I didn't do that." So just understand that interpreting and translating is an extremely important, and the quality of the interpreter and translator is essential. Now, I have many cases here. The first one, if you have, you can leave that slide, I'll get to it, but I'm going to go through this very quickly. Case number one is Ling versus State. The ACLU filed the friend of the court brief in a Georgia court, and now under Georgia law, to have the right interpreter is a constitutional requirement. We have the same thing in California. It is required. Another case, and I can have these cases. I think they should be in your package, but if not, I can send them to you. In California, the right to an interpreter is guaranteed by the state constitution. There's a case called, my eyes are going bad now, I'm gonna have to switch glasses. There's a case called US versus Joshi. And again, the case was determined based upon an interpreter making a mistake, and the court had to determine that untranslated evidence presented to the defendant's own language from the witness and therefore did not require translation. This is a very interesting case. And again, many cases are determined based upon the interpreter's knowledge of the words. Case number 4 goes on. The defendant was charged with forgery. And again, in the case, the judge failed to inform the defendant of his right of counsel, and a continuing appointment of counsel will be made to the defendant. Now, one of the important things that I need to mention to lawyers is that when you're in court and something comes up relative to a interpreting problem, you better go on the record and say, "I object," or say whatever you want to say. "Judge, I feel that that requires an interpreter," or "this interpreter made a mistake." Bring it up, because if you don't bring it up in trial, you're not going to be able to bring it up in for an appeal. You must preserve the record. Checking
Barry,
on the time. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. We're hitting 1:20 now. I haven't seen any questions asked yet. This is the time. If anybody has questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we can get to them. Otherwise, we have a few more minutes, Barry. You can continue with your presentation.
I'm trying to wrap it up. Okay. Well, I'm glad there are no questions, because that means that either you didn't understand anything I said, or you really totally understood and didn't have any questions. I can tell you that in the field of immigration, not only can you expand your practice by being able to say, I speak, I can speak many languages, But there are many cases in the immigration field when you go to that hearing, it's really important to have an interpreter and certainly the documents that you submit to be able to have the documents submitted absolutely perfectly. Let me see if I have that immigration case, criminal case. Okay, interpreter error in an immigration case. Mr. Iwan was arguing in U.S. asylum status to avoid persecution in his home country, Poland. During the hearing, the interpreter misinterpreted and failed to identify any inaccuracies at the hearing in court, which led to an incomplete interpretation of Mr. Iwan's statement, and the court denied his asylum status. Now, you do not want that to happen to you in any which way. So the quality of the interpreter and the knowledge of the interpreter, and certainly any documents that you submit, really must be at the highest level, or you're going to run into some problems. I'm going to try to wrap up now so we don't run into any time problem. So to get the whole picture in the practice of law and in the practice of interrelations with other people, understanding their language and understanding that many of the words of that language come from their culture, that we don't understand all of that. We need to be more tolerant of those who don't speak English. And when we are in the practice of law, we need to make sure we have a qualified, certified interpreter and translator if required, or they're otherwise, let's say in Hebrew, which is not a certifiable language, at least a registered person that the court accepts. So understanding the whole dynamics of the world of interpreting and translating, hopefully better than we understood it before the presentation, a couple points to ponder. The last words of Albert Einstein will never be known. They were spoken in German. The attending nurse at his deathbed did not understand German. What did the world miss by not having this translation? Could it have been the secrets of creation, existence, global warming? The world is getting smaller. Our practices in the profession of law should be getting larger and taking advantage of the fact that so many diverse people are not only here in California, the United States, but we can reach out to them. Law firms and businesses to grow commercially need to have the right resources to find interpreters and translators suitable for their needs and facilitates the globalization of their clientele and practice. We humans need to grow as well with our understanding of others. And if we don't speak their language, to be at least tolerant of the language and their difficulty that they may have in speaking English, and understanding that their cultures are different and the way they think may be different. Very important for us as lawyers and humans to understand that. So whatever languages you speak, however many languages that you want to speak, you can speak them all. Expand your business by being able to have the right interpreter, translator at your disposal. That pretty much wraps things up. There's you can reach me. If we go to the last slide that you have, let's see, so one more to go from there. Okay, that's Sylvia Goldstein. There's Barry Schreiber. Be happy to help you in any which way. It has been a pleasure to make the presentation. I thank Maggie and Joanne and Alex for making this presentation possible. I've stayed within the time frame. I thank you all for listening. It'd be my pleasure if you want to send me any questions via email. I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you all for listening and allowing me to make the presentation. Thank you.
I actually have a question. When you say that those languages that required certified interpreters, is there just one global organization that certifies all of them, or is it state by state? Or
okay, every state is going to be different in terms of which languages are certified. The one I gave you is California. Nevada may have it different. New York may have it different. Does that answer your question, or did I not quite understand it?
No, that did. They're different, but then, and does each state have its own certification entity, or?
Yes.
Okay.
But that organization that I mentioned, the translation school, that's national in scope, and I would think that many states, if someone presented their credentials certification from that school, that the judicial council of that state would approve. But I can only really speak for California.
And another question I had, okay, so in immigration court, if you bring in, it's the court's responsibility to provide the translator. So, you come in with whoever from it could be any random country, and they have to, if they don't have one on staff at the time, they have to delay the hearing and bring somebody else. Where do you know where they get those interpreters from?
I don't know where they get the interpreters from, but a good practice is to bring your own interpreter in that same language to make sure that the interpreting is accurate and you don't want to object. So for the cost of the interpreter on your side, you can feel very comfortable that the interpreter that the court has provided is doing an absolute perfect job. And when I use the word perfect, again, we can all understand that the misinterpreting of one word or one sentence could mean the difference to the court and to your client.
Great, thank you.
So we're coming to the end of the hour, and if there's no further questions coming out of the audience, I would like to say on behalf of the immigration section at BHBA, thank you so much, Barry, for joining us today and making this very informative presentation. I think a lot of us have some great takeaways and things that we can add to our practice and to our business. We are looking forward to having you join us at future immigration section meetings and events.
I will be there on October 8th. Thank you.
October 8th is our next executive committee section meeting, and everyone is welcome to attend. We're planning events going through the next year. And as Joanne said at the top, we have a CLE on October 24th on tax implications related to immigration. And also we're co-presenting on October 28th with the labor and employment section on domestic workers and employment and immigration related issues for domestic workers in the United States. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope that you have a great week. We hope to see you at more BHBA Immigration Section events. And if you need to reach out to Joanne and I, our emails are at the top of the chat. Have a great day.
Thank you all. Ciao.